Welcome, everybody. Robert and Crystal and I were sitting in the green room saying, why are we sitting in the green room when we could be seeing who's out there? So we're joining a little early. We'll get started with the content in a couple of minutes. But while we're doing that, let me just ask Robert and Crystal to introduce themselves to folks who are here and kind of see what they're doing. And I really appreciate both of you taking the time to be with our audience tonight. Thank you.
Happy
Crystal,
to
why don't you
be
go
here.
first?
Yeah.
Tell us about what you're up to.
Well, I am in Seattle, Washington, and I have been working with families for about 13 years now with college admissions, financial aid, really the whole process from start to finish. So I typically have a lot of parents and students that are sophomores and juniors. I've had a lot more senior conversations this year than I have had in the last 13 years.
Mm.
And so it's been a fun year. But overall, I would say my favorite part of this game is probably turned more into college admissions, but my background's in financial aid and all of that. And I love teaching families just how the game works. Like, how do you know whether you're going to get money versus not? And just really starting to understand the silliness that is the college game.
That's beautiful, Robert.
I love it. So my name is Robert Farrington, and I'm the founder of The College Investor. And I have been talking about money and education now for over 15 years. So I focus a ton on the money aspect in terms of financial aid, saving for college, paying for college, how to get it done right. And we do a lot of journalism and research in the space to help you maximize your financial aspect of paying for college. And of course, from doing this for 10 to 15 years, I also do have quite a good grasp of the emotional, psychological, family dynamic side of these paying for college conversations. But you're going to hear it from the money side from me when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, that's great, Robert. And we're going to wait another minute or two before we jump into the FAFSA form. But I think what you said is like the punchline for the whole thing. It's like the emotional part of this is what drives people to sometimes make really bad decisions. And then they just say, well, and then the rationalization starts. And the rationalization, I went through it myself. I have two girls who went through the process, and I'm sitting there saying to myself, oh yeah, well, but maybe if, and then you remember, oh, I remember when I wasn't around when they were growing up, and we're going to do, and I hear this from families all the time about how this is like the way to make it even. All this kind of stuff happened. Maybe I didn't save as much as I wanted to, or, maybe this, and I'm going to go and make the college dream possible. Right. And then the reality strikes about like what that really means.
I mean, you nailed it, John. I think a big thing to take away from this conversation, if you're listening, we're going to go through a lot of the technical details, but yes, college is worth it today in 2024 in America. However, it is not worth it if you overpay and spend a fortune and you're digging out student loan debt for the next 20 years. Like, there really is a level where college is worth it. And then there is a level where college becomes a financial burden on your family for 20, 25 years. And so let's not get to there. Let's talk about how to make college affordable and pay for it the right way and be smart about it today.
Well, that's great. It's 8:04 now, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. First, thanks everyone for joining tonight. We are super excited to have this conversation, as you can tell. I'm John Hupalo, the host of tonight, and your founder for mycollegecorner.com. Just two housekeeping items here. One, if you have a question, please post it in the Q&A, and we'll try to be mindful and answer as many of those as we can. I actually received a few in the last couple of days, so I'll ask them during the course of this. And as you note, this is being recorded so that we can post it up at least at mycollegecorner.com, and Crystal and Robert will have it as well, and they can post it as they like. So again, we are absolutely ecstatic that you're able to join us tonight, because we're talking a little bit nerdy about stuff that we get excited about, the FAFSA form, the financial aid process. For those who are just now joining, we have Robert Farrington with us. Robert is America's millennial money expert. I love that, Robert, the way you say that. But he puts out a ton of really great free content about saving, planning, and paying for college in all kinds of different formats. So go in and find Robert's websites, his TikTok channel, all the rest, and you'll really get a great education on everything financial. So Robert, welcome. I'm really glad to have you here. And then Crystal Tate is the founder of Crystal Clear College Planning. She probably didn't know that her parents did her such a great favor by naming her Crystal, because Crystal Clear College Planning is a great name for a college planning company. And her goal is to help you pay for college without going broke. And that's also something, Crystal, that I think is just fantastic. When we talk about it, that's what it's all about. Let's find the college experience without going broke. So she's in the trenches day to day, talking to families about how to pay for college without going broke. And we're going to get a lot of great information. So before we jump into the FAFSA form, I do, with both of you, want to ask one question. It's the elephant in the room. You know, last year, the rollout of the FAFSA form was clearly a well-documented train wreck. Nothing about it went right. The Department of Education, frankly, was not very forthcoming with the problems that they were having. And so we know what happened. It dragged through the whole year. The reform was released very recently for all comers, and I haven't seen very many problems. Is the rollout much better this year?
It definitely seems that way. Yeah. So
I'm
far, no craziness.
It seems like it's going pretty smooth. Nothing that we would expect out of the ordinary. People are getting them processed. And even on the college side, I haven't really heard any issues getting the ISARs and things going. So it seems like it's smooth sailing.
Which is so exciting.
Yeah, and I hope it comforts people who are watching this to know that, all the work and the anxiety they go just getting the information together and ready to actually post, they're not going to run into the same kind of hurdles and roadblocks that they hit last year. So let me just ask you both, sort of out of order. We have a bunch of questions to get to, but on that knowledge that the form seems to be working, are you advising families to do it now, or should they wait? What's the right process timing question here?
So from being in the trenches, it's more our financial aid forms filing team just started last week in really getting financial aid forms submitted, because we didn't want to be at the forefront and find out that they were still a hot mess and be part of that. So it's been more like our goal is to get things done here by the end of the year for all of the families that we're working with, to make sure that they're timely.
And I second that. I'm encouraging everyone to fill out that FAFSA as quickly as you can. And for those families that are watching and they don't understand why, federal aid, there's no timeline. Like, you submit your form, you'll get your federal aid. However, a lot of state grant programs, they have deadlines. Most of them are going to be like February, March, April of next year. So you got time. But university aid is typically first come, first serve. So you want to be in that door and not waiting until like April and being like, oh, maybe I should have filled out the FAFSA, because you want to get that aid now before someone gets awarded that aid package that you could have gotten.
Yeah, cool. So, what I'd like to do is actually start with a lightning round of acronyms, because just to level set for everybody, almost everybody will know the first one, but after that, let's just be clear about what we're going to talk about when we get into the jargon. So let me start, Crystal, with you. FAFSA, the FAFSA. What does that mean?
So it's the free application for federal student aid. So the government form that we all get to fill out in order to qualify for the grants and the work study and the federal student loans.
Great. So FAFSA is really critical. Robert, I have two for you. How about FSA at U.S. Department of Education?
So federal student aid, or FSA, is the department that runs FAFSA, Pell Grants, the student loan program. It's one of multiple departments within the Department of Education. If you're looking at the headlines that it could be eliminated, FSA as a whole chunk will likely just get moved to the Department of Treasury. So things probably won't change even if they do eliminate the Department of Education. And so they are the ones that are operating all these programs.
Excellent. And how about FSAID?
And this is your ticket to logging online and checking your FAFSA. It's also what you use to manage your student loan. So it's your FSA ID. You go online, you create it. It's just your login, your username and password, but it's the same one. And if you're like my age and you had student loans 20 years ago, you have the same login now as you do for your children's FAFSA form. So keep that in mind. It stays with you forever.
That's great. Crystal, how about SAI?
So that is the Student Aid Index, affectionately formerly known as the EFC. So this is really the scale that they use to determine eligibility for federal student aid. And then there's also opportunity for, like Robert was saying, qualifying for aid at the university level. Their need-based aid can be determined off of that as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's it for the three-letter acronyms for now. One that I still scratch my head about, Robert, prior year.
It's the worst way to phrase it, but for your FAFSA this year, you're using your prior year tax returns, your 2023 tax returns for the 2025 FAFSA that we're filling out. But I want you to realize it does make sense because 2023 is the only tax return you have completed. It's the most recent one. Like we're here now and you completed that return in April if you filed on time. So that's why you're using your 2023 numbers for your 2025 FAFSA, but it's the worst wording.
Yeah, some marketing genius at the Department of Education probably got a promotion on that one. I don't know how that happened, but Crystal, let me ask you just a general topic that's really important for this discussion, and that's need-based versus merit-based financial aid.
So this is really fun, and really the world that I live in is teaching families the difference between, can I get need-based aid or merit-based aid based on my student's academic profile and my family's financial profile? And then what does that mean in terms of the kinds of money that that school gives? So it is super important to start to understand. That's why I kind of said this earlier. It's the game that they play. And so where does my family fit into this role of being able to qualify for what kind of money, need or merit, or a combination of both?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And then we're not going to talk much about this, Robert, but the CSS profile is a term that a lot of folks know about. And how does that fit into this picture?
So the CSS is a secondary application that you submit for financial aid, and it's used by about 275 private colleges. So if you don't know what to file, everyone does the FAFSA. And if you're going to one of these 275 or so schools, check with their financial aid office. They usually communicate it very well. Fill out the CSS profile as well. It's very, very similar, but there are a few different nuances, and that could be a whole other thing, but you can Google that one.
Yeah, that's like a whole separate topic. I'll just say it this way, that some folks say that they have some anxiety about filling out the FAFSA form, and hopefully that will be relieved based on what we're going to talk about tonight. But for the CSS profile, they really dig a lot deeper, and they characterize things differently, and it is I'm going to say it is a whole different beast. So looking at that separately for families that have to do that, that's probably the best advice that you can give somebody. And we're not going to dive too much more into that right now. So what I'd like to do, though, is actually get into the weeds a little bit. So far we've figured out that the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, is the form to get federal aid eligibility for federal aid, which means grants, work study, and federal student loans. And the really critical thing about this is that the student aid index, and Crystal said it really nicely, is it's not a number per se. It's a number, but it's not really used quite like a number. We should get into this in a little bit more detail about how that scale works. But before we do that, Robert, let me just ask you, we talked a little bit about other users of the FAFSA form information, some states. Are there any others that will use that information?
Yeah, so the FAFSA, not only does it unlock your federal student aid, but it can unlock state student aid. So a lot of states offer grants, and sometimes they call them scholarships, but they use that FAFSA form. So your FAFSA will get sent to these state grant agencies. I'm in California, they have the Cal Grant program. New York's got theirs, and there's a bunch of different programs that use that information. A lot of outside scholarship places also will look at your FAFSA. Like while they say they're need-based, they want to see that financial need from the FAFSA results. And even some merit private scholarship companies will want to see the FAFSA, and they're not going to necessarily award you all of it if you don't have financial aid, because they are looking to help people and they don't necessarily want to award someone that already has a lot of money more money.
Great. Crystal, anything to add to that?
No, I see it every year where there are plenty of high income earners, though, that say, I don't need to fill out the FAFSA because I'm not going to qualify for financial aid. Like literally that statement. And I go, Yes, that may be true at some schools, but the opportunity to get merit-based aid at some is tied to the FAFSA, and they don't recognize that they're leaving money on the table, even when you're a high-income family. And so it's important to file the form for the first year, no matter what, is always my rule of thumb.
I'll also add, I've noticed this year, and I want to say I'm going to botch the state, but maybe Michigan. Some of their free community college programs have no cap on your SAI. So any student in the state can still get free community college, even if they're from a wealthy family. And so even if you don't think you need aid, like go in, fill out the FAFSA and see, you might qualify for state aid.
Yeah, the other point here, and this is a smaller one, but there are now 8 states that are going to require the FAFSA to be filed to get that diploma at the end of the senior year. And there are some opt-outs in there. But when people ask me, I say what you said, in addition to the fact that every student, no matter like how wealthy the family may be, no matter what the assets and the income, they're eligible for a student loan, right? And so, those student loans, and what, 60% or so of students in school need a loan. So, there are lots of reasons to do that. For Crystal, thanks for bringing that up right at the top, because I think it's really good advice to have all filers, not just because it's required for graduation, but everybody should try to do that a little bit. So let's start at the top of the funnel, Crystal. Let's get into the idea of like, how is this FAFSA filing process initiated? Who's responsible for that, and what should they do?
So what you're going to start with is what Robert was saying earlier, which is getting your FSA ID. So, right, that's your username and password in order to go in, log in, create your account. A parent needs one and a student needs one in order to complete it. And then you're going to play with that game of having to submit information, both income and assets, for both the parent and student. Things get a little bit messier when you're a divorced family, which is why I had a lot of conversations with seniors this year, because I did a divorced session talking about strategies associated with FAFSA and financial aid. But that's, for a typical family, what it's going to start with.
Yes. So the student's going to be responsible for initiating that process, and then they have to go find their contributor, the other party, right, who needs to file with them. And let's just talk about the contributor for a moment, because this is a new term, technically a new term, but the reality is somebody's always had to provide financial information for the students, right? So if you can just go down that path a little bit longer, Crystal, about the contributors in different scenarios. And I had, for instance, a question that came the other day for tonight, said, so we're married, we've been separated, we're filing jointly. Who's the contributor?
So this is where that challenge is with the 2-year look back. And technically, when you're filing, right, like if you are still married but separated, and everybody's like, well, we're still in the midst of all of the things. It's technically whoever is financially supporting the student 50% of the time or more. And so when people are splitting their kid and their expenses 50-50, we like to just look at, well, who makes the most sense in terms of understanding your college list and where you have opportunity to qualify for more or less aid, which schools are going to ask for both sets of parents no matter what. But you're going to pick a primary parent for the sake of being that contributor in in an officially divorced or separated situation. But if you're not like separated in terms of all of the things yet, then you're still, I mean, you still have to report all of that information as 2023, right, for a 2025 grad. So everything's joint. And then I saw in the Q&A that they were like, somebody was asking, well, what if my income changes? And it's the same kind of conversation. Your financial picture has changed. So then you have to go back and appeal to the universities specifically to say, hey, guess what? I know I had to report the prior year, but that's not the truth of my situation now. And therefore, this is actually what my income and assets is. So you're reporting what actually happened, and then you're going, but here's my facts, right? Here's the change that I need you to take into consideration for the qualification.
So Robert, just clarify for us, so we're really clear about this. For income information, I'm going to use my 2023 taxes. What am I using for my asset information?
So you fill it out on your FAFSA. So your parents are going to put your assets in, and if you're a child, you're going to put your assets in. A child might have a checking account, a savings account, something like that they've earned. They might have a UTMA or some type of investment account. That's pretty rare, but it happens. And they could have other assets. I don't want to dismiss it. I've seen it all. But then the parents are going to report all their checking accounts, savings account, investment accounts. I repeat, do not include your retirement accounts on your FAFSA. It's one of the biggest errors I see. And if you drop that 401k value in there, it can seriously inflate your SAI. So don't include your retirement accounts. And then you'll just link your tax return and it will pull all that information in automatically from your taxes.
And the balances for the assets that are being reported are current assets at the time of filing. Is that right?
It's the day you file. So you can maybe pay all your credit card bills and deplete some of that checking account or something like that. And those are very valid things to do to maybe lower some of those assets. But, for most people, it's not going to fluctuate a lot, but there are definitely some levers you can pull at that time.
Sure. So, the point here is income is a 2-year look back unless something's changed, and Crystal advises, and sure you do too, Robert, to go and make an appeal. And asset information is based as of the time of the filing. There's something new this year, well, actually last year, but for filers this year as well, with regard to assets on small businesses and family farms. I see Robert wincing just like everyone does, but I want to ask you, Robert, to wince a little bit and vocalize why you're wincing, because it is causing some pain for some folks.
It is, because you have to provide the fair market value of your small business or your farm. And one, that can be very vague. Part two is it could also be a lot of money that you are now adding as an asset. So a simple way to do this is to take the fair market value of your business or your farm. Another way to do it is to look at your balance sheet and say what your equity is. I think you take the one that's reasonable, but also, the one that might be on the lower side that's still reasonable to do it, but it can add a lot of assets to your FAFSA form.
What about my primary residence? Do I have to claim that?
You don't claim your primary residence. Secondary ones, yes. Rental properties, yes. No primary ones.
Great. Anything else about assets and income and reporting? We talked about what happens if something has happened to the family where the situation's changed, so you go in and you make an appeal.
I see in the comments, Jim here asked, how are 529 plans considered? And so if you have a parent-owned 529 plan for a dependent student, those are parent assets. So you report it in your parent investments. If you have a grandparent or other person-owned 529 plan, they are not reported at all. Don't have to worry about it. And if there is an independent student here and you have a 529 plan, it's your asset.
That's great. I think getting that asset and income information and having it available beforehand is really important. But I also, this is just so counterintuitive. I'm from the IRS and I'm here to help you. So this idea that I'm going to press a button, and I remember I did this with my daughter 2 years ago. She said, "I don't want to hit that button," and I said, "Hit that button." Crystal, what do you tell folks about? They talked at the beginning about the emotion of it. Are you finding that people are somewhat reluctant to rely on the IRS, and has that actually been helpful in the FAFSA simplification process the Department of Education has been looking for?
I would say I have skeptics every year. I think I've gotten one so far already that was just like, no, do I really have to hand over my information? Is this really necessary? And so for sure it can be a challenge.
Do you recommend though that people do it? And let me ask this, I'm going to say this. I think it makes sense to do it, right? If you can get over that hump, you do it. But
Yes.
what if you really don't want to? How do you, what's the remedy for that? Or what's the option for a family that just doesn't want to do it?
And I have families every year that will then decide that they don't want to. And honestly, I usually assess it based off of their schools on their list and just what I've seen happen in the past, in regards to, could I lose out on, say it's a high income asset family, if they don't care about how much it's going to cost, I guess it doesn't really matter either way if they're okay being a full pay candidate, right? Like then the repercussions is, well, you just might pay full price. If that's okay with you, then that's okay with me. But that is a very small group of people because most people don't like to pay sticker price for stuff.
Right. Yeah, and Robert, you said something before, and I think somebody heard part or maybe not all of it about sort of emptying out your bank account and sort of in justice saying, may pay down your bills or whatever. But I think, two things. One, nobody thinks it's a good idea to sort of game this system per se. But what you were suggesting is that, if you have some bills and you have some money in your checking account and you happen to pay that bill the day before you file your FAFSA, you'll have less in your checking account. Is there any more to that?
Yeah, so the FAFSA looks at your assets, so your checking account, your savings account balance, your, investment account balance, not the retirement stuff, but your other investment account balances. But guess what? They don't look at credit card debt, auto loans, things like that. Your home mortgage, since your primary residence isn't included in this. So, I'm not necessarily saying to game the system, but if you were gonna make your mortgage payment or your car loan payment on December 5th, you could make it today and then file the FAFSA tomorrow. And now that money has gone out of your checking account, which they do look at, and that lowers it. Now, I say in the comments, maybe it's $5,000 or so that's in your checking account. Is that going to make a big difference? No, not really. If you were talking about $40,000, $50,000, yeah, that could make a sizable difference. But a few $100s, a few $1,000s is probably not going to seriously impact your aid equation. But tens of thousands of dollars will.
Yeah, and I'll say that I know some of the SAI estimators are out there. We have one at mycollegecorner.com. So if you're actually interested in seeing like what that will do, you can go there and just put in some information, and there's some bars that'll show you how a $5,000 change in assets or a $50,000 change in assets would affect your SAI. So a great question. But this is one of those places where, one of those issues where I think it's perfectly logical. Do some research, and I think you'll figure out fairly quickly that minor changes are just not going to move the needle all that much. Another great question in the chat, which was on the list of questions that I got the other day also, was, so, the parent says, we're divorced, I've had this, whatever it is, I'm just not going to give information to my son or daughter. I'm not going to be the contributor, can't do it. What happens for the student in that case? Either of you
Robert?
know?
No,
Yeah.
I didn't know. So if they don't want to be the contributor, and I would say then and I have these conversations with families all the time, especially in the divorce scenario, is if one parent refuses to provide the information and the other one then has to be the primary contributor for the sake of filling out the FAFSA, then say that's mom and dad says no. Okay, fine. Then mom's going to fill it out. If there's any schools though that are going to ask for a CSS profile non-custodial form, then they're going to ask for dad's information no matter what. And the mom's not going to see it and kid's not going to see it, but the mom and student are then going to have to yet again appeal if dad absolutely refuses to submit his information to those universities that say, we want dad's information, right? So they have to be an advocate for themselves in that situation if there is some contention.
Great. And how is child support treated for FAFSA purposes?
Now that's actually a beneficial change where it is reported one time as an asset that for what you received in that year. So that is actually a beneficial piece now because it used to be income, which hurt single parents in reporting. So that's actually good.
You guys have done a great job of not talking about the past, but I'm just going to say this for right now. The whole fiasco last year was around this idea the Department of Education wanted and the Congress wanted a simplified FAFSA process. So there was a FAFSA Simplification Act. And long story short, it's actually well-intentioned, right? They cut the number of questions from 150 or 60 down to about 100, and many times families are filling far fewer than those. they've got the IRS tax thing working really well now, so that's pretty good. And the second part, and I guess the last part of that whole thing is that they did try to find a way to provide some changes that'll give a better, I think, fairer view of what the family's assets are and income is. So, there was a lot of pain last year, but hopefully this class this year and coming years will benefit from that. And the FAFSA Simplification Act promise will actually come to fruition. So, thank you for going to. Is there any other technical stuff about filling out the form that we should talk about? Anything, Crystal, from your sort of in the trenches, or Robert, from the conversations you're having with your listeners and audience?
I mean, I'm just looking through some of the questions here in the chat, and I know there's always some interesting ones. The trust one comes up a lot. Someone asked a question, how are assets in the trust handled? It's not about the executor. It's about what the trust says, who owns what. So if it's 4 kids and everyone gets 25%, 25% of that trust is the parent's asset. Or if it's 50-50, 50% of that trust is the parent's asset. So I think trust ones are there, but it's always about who actually owns it, not about necessarily one sibling being an executor, not being an executor. I saw another one about a business account. Again, it really depends on how your business is set up. If you're like a sole proprietor and it's just your side hustle, it's just going to just count as your own checking account and be your asset. If you have an actual S corporation, LLC, something like that, you're going to treat it as a business asset. It's going to be inside the whole shell of the business. So you might also have some other value there, but you'll include it as part of the valuation of your business to treat that. So there's no straight answer, but for a lot of people, it's either just going to be your side hustle checking account and that you just count that cash, or you have an actual business value.
That's great. So we've done a pretty good job, I think, of like getting into the weeds on some very technical questions. And thank you both for answering those where it's very understandable and somewhat intuitive. Let me ask this now. So the information's in, did the download from the IRS, everyone's happy, contributor, student, complete. Crystal, what's the next step now? What happens with that information, and what are we waiting for?
We are waiting for the colleges to take that data and then determine how much they're going to give in terms of their institutional need-based aid, their merit-based aid, and to be able to kind of put the whole package together. So we start to do awards boot camps is what we call them in February and March, really explaining to families, how do you read this award offer that you've gotten that now is going to package all of these things, including work study and student loans, and how do I know what's free versus what's not? Because this is most of the time people's first time through this process with their kid, not really understanding what that true net cost is for them, and then being able to say, okay, this is what I've got. Were there any significant material changes that I need to report for my financial situation? And then appeal accordingly, and then be able to say, I can honestly make a good consumer choice by May 1st around what makes the most sense for my family.
Robert, when does a student know what their SAI is? Does it just magically appear on the screen, or like where does that come from? That's the drum roll, right?
For most families and most students, you hit submit, parents have hit submit, it will show up. You can log into your dashboard, you can see it. Also, the student, not the parent, but the student will get an email with it. There are times it will say like, can't provide an SAI, check back, and it takes like 2 or 3 days, and then your SAI will appear. And yes, you can log into your dashboard and refresh it, and it should show up in a couple of days. But you find it right there on the FAFSA portal, or the student will get that email and you'll see what the magic number is. That's kind of a magic number.
The one thing you just said, again, going back to the emotional part of this, and I know it's a big deal for a lot of people, whether they're helicopter parents or not, it doesn't really matter, but this is the student's process, right? And this is kind of, they're for the first time actually responsible for making stuff happen. They're filing their application, but they're also filing all of this information with the government, and they are the touch point, right? And we are, as parents, are supporters in this process. We need to be sometimes, I'm going to say, more heavily handed supporters, but to try to understand that, you as the parent are not going to get this information back. So you need to sort of stay on top of this if your student is one of those who needs a little pushing. Again, one of the emotional points, but Crystal, I imagine you see this all the time in your practice. Is that right?
I do. Yeah, it is. College is definitely like one of those number one emotional decisions that even at the forefront when we're trying to teach families and students how much this is going to cost them before they even get to that point of getting the award offer. It's hard for them to digest. Yeah.
Great. Question came into the question. What if you're filing on the form on paper? How do you find out your SAI? Same process. Once they process it, it will be posted.
Same process. It's just you have to allow time. You're going to mail that form in. Someone at Federal Student Aid is going to literally type your form in to the computer and it will process it and you'll find it on the dashboard. So like if you can avoid filing a paper form, just file it digitally. Everything's digital now. There's no benefit. There's only delay, headache, and the potential for error if you file a paper form.
Also, someone asked, we will have this posted, that is the recording of this on mycollegecorner.com, and Robert and Crystal will have it as well. So you'll be able to find it in various different places. So thank you for asking that. I want to just drill into the SAI a little deeper. Crystal, you said before it says it's an index by name, but it's really a range. Can you just talk a little bit about, the range at the bottom is negative 1500, which is crazily counterintuitive. Like, I don't know where that came from, but it doesn't matter. It is, right? So it's negative 1500 is the lowest. And then what's the highest? And sort of embedded in that question, Robert, please help us with this as well. Is negative 1500 better than zero, better than 30,000, better than 60,000? Like what does this really mean?
So I always teach families that when I do a class called How to Pay for College Without Going Broke, and the premise of that is understanding where your student best matches up within the academic context of a university, married with your financial picture best matching up with your opportunity to get aid. So this number is going to teach you if it's at zero, or negative 1500, right? Like I have the opportunity to qualify for all of the types of money available, whether it be need-based aid or merit-based aid, directly from an institution or from the federal government or the state, right? Like all opportunities are there. The higher that number gets, then the more challenging it gets to get money at certain types of schools. So I like to use state schools as an example. Like I'm in Washington, so University of Washington gives need-based aid when you are in the qualification based on poverty level for money, state and federal. But once you get above that, you don't qualify for anything anymore. So if your SAI is over a certain number, I think it's like 6655, that precludes you from aid, and that's not a high level of income, right? And so then you go, this is my huge teaching moment for families, is to say, when you're in that mid-range, you should start looking at private schools that are going to fill your need-based aid, because that's where you're going to have an opportunity to make that school affordable and not be expected to pay $30,000 a year for room and board and tuition at University of Washington. And then as that number gets higher, then it's going to be, I probably don't qualify for need-based aid anymore, but now I could qualify for merit-based aid at a private school that looks like it has a sticker price of $75,000, but your kid is a good academic fit. Therefore, you're going to see that cost come down. And now you're at a more reasonable sticker price from the retail. Right. And then you get up to the elite institutions, which is a whole other ball game around how high can that number go? Well, the cost of attendance for universities is now approaching $100,000 a year, right? So that's where that number starts to make a difference. Is if a elite institution is saying their sticker is 100 and your SAI is over 100, you're going to go and pay full freight, right? Like that's what it teaches us in the grand scheme of things.
And it's really interesting when, like, us nerds who dig into this stuff, it's interesting that the title of the guidance from the U.S. Department of Education is something on the order of, how to figure out the SAI and Pell Grant eligibility, right? They've tied it directly. And there are some who think that the negative 1,500 SAI is really an indicator for families that those sort of 0 to negative 1,500, but at the bottom of that, are going to get full Pell Grants. Like they're eligible for full Pell Grant aid, work study, and student loans. But it's interesting. I think the way you characterize that is really great. The other sort of point I think that's worth making here is what you pointed out, Crystal, which is the difference between sticker price and net price. That probably should have been in our opening round of acronyms and concepts to know. But Robert, you want to just talk about that just for a minute, difference between the sticker price and the net price?
Yeah, I mean, college is one of those things, and I always think of Ron Lieber's quote. It's one of those only things that we know in life that some people pay full sticker price, that's what's listed on the website. Other families pay 0, and most people pay somewhere in between, but none of us know what the heck anyone's paying except for the financial aid office. So the sticker price is literally what you see posted on the website. And this is where you get those scary numbers. I know we do a roundup of the most expensive college tuitions and everything. And that's the sticker price. The net price is what you see on your financial aid award letter at the very bottom of what you're actually going to write a check for after you get student loans, Pell Grants, financial aid, merit aid, whatever else they're throwing at you. That's what you actually pay out of pocket. And that's the number that actually really matters because that's the check you're going to have to write or the amount of student loans you're going to have to borrow. And so when you make your college decision this spring, you should be really looking at the net price. But as Crystal alluded to, even these crazy high sticker price schools, they throw a lot of money at certain types of students. So don't necessarily be scared to apply to them, but also have some schools on your application list that you can write the check for come next May.
Yeah, there's a statistic out there that this is directionally accurate. The average tuition discount, so the reduction in the sticker price, is over 50% now on average across all schools. So you see 80, you should think 40, sort of right off the top on average. But again, your situation, could be different. Crystal, if I have need, I'm a negative 1,000 SAI student. Are the schools obligated to give me that aid?
No. And that's where the challenge comes in teaching families that there are schools that don't give good quality aid and you're not going to get it filled. So we call it gapping is one of our terminologies, and just recognizing that when you're in that category, you have to be smart about how you select your schools, because if you're not, then you fall into this default of thinking, hey, I'm going to get money because I'm poor. Well, that's not necessarily true, because the college can't afford to give you. They don't have that in their endowment. It's not in their budget. The quality of aid that they give is not good. So we have to look at schools that give a strong amount of need-based aid and where that student is in line academically in order for that to be maximized.
And I think you said something before that I want to highlight here, and that is that there's this idea that the in-state school is going to be the least expensive school for any given family. And what you said before is that that's really might not be the case, probably isn't the case for a lot of. Do you want to just highlight that again for us?
Yeah, and I work with families across the country, and it's one of those things that we see every year, that there are students that can go to the Midwest and the East Coast where there's prominently more schools that are small to mid-sized liberal arts institutions that are trying and vying to get kids to come, that are willing to pay and discount down to the point where that net cost can be the same, if not maybe a little bit more, at least comparable to state school pricing. And I choked at some of the increases in Robert, you said you were in California, and I was like, wow, even it's up to $45,000 a year for the UCs for tuition, room and board. And it's now we're at 35, and granted, there are some states where you can still get it for 20, but that's rare now in comparison. And it's more likely to be on this higher end, which you can get a private school to come down to this same price. And that's something a lot of families just don't realize they can do.
And I think you touched on a point there with like the UC system, and we have our Cal State system. An out-of-state student coming here, they charge you a huge premium, and they count on that money to pay for a lot of funds. Like you could be paying $50,000 a year to come to these schools. But the other problem is a lot of state institutions, it's the state government. It is structured. They have their aid that they can give that's legally allowed by law, and there's not much flexibility in these things. Whereas the private universities have big endowments and fundraising and all sorts of private initiatives where they can potentially pull a lot of levers to get you there. So keep that in mind as you're comparing the two. Now, if you just want to go to your local state school and live at home, still might be one of the most cost-effective choices. But we know from doing this for a long time that that is a very small majority of college students. Most of them are not looking to live at home and stay there. And really the reason why we're having this conversation to start with.
Robert, this sort of begs the question for both of you, but and this is I'll just state it straight out, and that is, does a student have a better chance of getting into school if they're not asking for financial aid?
I'll let Crystal go. I mean, it depends. It's one of those, it depends. It depends.
Yeah.
Depends on the school.
Yeah. And I will say this too, like there are shady things that happen every year. There are schools that are like, if we wanted to throw out special terminology, right? Enrollment management is strong with some of them where they really do figure out how much it's going to take to get you to come, and how much they don't have to give you to get you to come. And I could throw a couple schools under the bus from this last year too. I won't say names, but that where it was strong academic students got into universities, should have gotten merit aid, didn't, appealed, got money, appealed again, got more money, appealed a third time, got more money, right? Like, and it's one of those where, yet again, filling out financial aid forms sometimes is a requirement for some of these institutions still to get that merit-based aid or to get that consideration. But I will tell people that if you do have the ability to pay, filling out financial aid forms at some schools can also help your student get in. Because if you are able and capable to be a full pay candidate, right, it goes the other way, where you have to make sure that you recognize they need those people, right? Just like the California needs those out-of-staters to subsidize, right? It goes
Both ways. Like you just
Yep.
said, if you're going to a private school and you're going to pull pay, you're probably getting in the door. I mean, it's just what it is. If you're coming to California out of state, you have a very strong odds if you're going to pay that $50,000 a year. They do have levers they can pull, and it's kind of crazy that it can't happen. But again, craft your list accordingly because it's not a guarantee. So this is why when people say apply to 7, 8, or 9 schools, you want like 3 shoo-ins that are going to work. You want like 3 that you can play some games with, and then you want a few in the middle there. And I don't know, Crystal, if you think the same way.
Yeah, I in my world, I always say it's really nice to know that you're getting in and getting money, and that you have a lot of like opportunity to choose and play that game. And if you throw some reach schools and like financially or admissions wise on the list, fine, so be it. But you're going to recognize what's going to happen there, and this is really what you have to pick from. And I had a conversation with a mom earlier where she actually said that to me. She's like, "Yeah, I know you applied to Boston." But we're not going to pay for that, right? And she's like, yeah, so maybe we should just stop that game. Like realizing now, like the emotional component of that when you get to the end of the line, because she said, well, if I get in, I don't even want to have that conversation,
Right?
Because I can't afford to pay. But not everybody thinks that way.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where it's so easy to give that advice to somebody else, right? Because you
Right.
don't have to sit across the kitchen table from your kid saying, we can't afford that, right? It's not, it's just not the way it goes. We're getting on like 50-minute mark, and I'd like to try to keep us into an hour. And I think we've done a nice job of answering questions. So if you can check the chat and see if we've gotten all those questions. The one point I do want to drive home here toward the end, we've kind of touched on it, but we haven't said it in these terms, and that is, shopping for school is like shopping for anything else, right? You really need to look at this as a consumer purchase, right? And this idea that colleges are going to be paternalistic or maternalistic, and they're going to look, colleges care about their students, but they care about net tuition revenue. right? Because they're a business and they have to have that. And they approach it, as you were saying before, Crystal, enrollment management. They're trying to get the best class for the cheapest price. And on the other side, you have the consumer who's had these dreams of colleges and all of, like, the nice sweatshirts and all that, trying to figure out, well, how can we pay that enormous bill if we have to? Should I dip into my 401k? Should I go and take a $100,000 parent loan? But to approach it more as a consumer, say, in my right mind, I wouldn't buy $100,000 car in this circumstance. Why should I buy $100,000 education? I imagine you agree with that, but you're in the trenches, both of you. How do you have that conversation with a family or with a student, and when?
Well, I'll say the when part, because that's easier, is the earlier you can have transparent financial conversations with your kids, the better. And honestly, this starts in middle school, and it should definitely start at the beginning of high school if you're not always there. And you don't need to lay out the full balance sheet, but you need to be having these conversations of like, this is what we've saved for college. This is what we're expecting to maybe contribute to college. These are the kinds of schools that we can maybe afford. And then as you get to your junior year, like it does need to be like, the number's $5,000 or whatever it is. Like you got to be very clear, because then as your child starts looking at all these consumer options, as you put it, John, and they're deciding what the college is, they can also have a sense of what the financial impact is. And I've found in teaching financial literacy for a long time to high schoolers is a lot of them get the numbers more than we give them credit for, but they don't have the maturity to overcome the psychological hurdles of their family to make a choice that is maybe counterintuitive to what they think mom and dad wants, or auntie or grandma or whoever knows. They don't have that maturity yet, but they get the numbers more than I think we ever give them credit for. And so having those conversations and being supportive of those choices makes the decisions a little bit more easy. It's still very emotional though.
We started the conversation talking about emotion, and we're ending the conversation talking about emotion. And I think that giant elephant in the room is there for everybody. And just acknowledging that, and maybe sometimes just taking a breath and saying, okay, this is also the time, when I wrote about this in a book that we published 10 years ago now almost, but this is the time when the student's separating from the family, right? And so on one side, you have like the high school counselors, and you have the Department of Education, everybody saying, you're an adult. You've got to make these choices for yourself. And I'm the parent, and I still remember them, kicking soccer balls like fish when they were 6 years old. And, they're not ready to make those decisions. And there's something like in the middle of that. But I think just understanding that that's part of this is really important for parents to sort of maintain their sanity. Crystal, you're shaking your head. Do you find yourself a counselor, an emotional counselor as much as a financial counselor?
It's pretty often that I will go into meetings with families that they're like, I didn't intend this to be a therapy session. I'm sorry. Right. And it's true because of all of the things that we've been talking about. And I 100% agree with what Robert said. The earlier you can start having these conversations, the better. The session that I do on how to pay for college without going broke is always like that. Often that first foundational time where parents have really started to think about, oh, this is going to cost me this much. Like, I really do have to think about this in a way that works for my family. But I will say that there are also times where I will have families that will hire me, and then they will say, I do want it to be affordable, and then they won't listen to anything and have all the crazy schools on your list. And so then at the end, they're like, well, why do they still all cost 50 to 70,000 a year? Because you didn't play the game the way that you were supposed to play the game, right? Like, you can't expect a UCLA to be 75,000 all in to want an out-of-state student to come and not spend 75, right? Like, that's not how that institution works, right? So that's why I still go back to what I said at the very beginning. You have to understand the game in order to be able to play it. And unfortunately, this nonprofit of education ain't very nonprofity.
It's still revenue maximizing. Just because there's not a lot of profit, they find a way to make a lot of money and also spend it so there's nothing left over.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
Every student,
Yeah.
every student needs a lazy river, right? I guess that's
Oh my God.
that's what it comes down. That's what it comes down to. There's one more question, actually two in the questions. One is said, I'm still struggling to determine primary contributor, and I think the bottom line on that, the parent who's contributed the most to the students, so I'm going to say economic or supported the most in the last 12 months is that's sort of like the bright line test, right? So that's the answer there. Simply, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy for you to determine how that happens, but that's the primary contributor. I got that right, Crystal and Robert?
Yeah.
You got it right. I also think a lot of families overthink this one. It's really not as hard as you're making it out to be, even for divorced families. Like, yes, I know that there's child support involved, but that's now changed. It's not considered income anymore. Like you're paying for a house, insurance, getting them to school every day, gas, food, groceries. 95% of the time, the primary contributor is who the child lives with. 95% of the time. I'd say there's very rare exceptions to that, unless I still haven't seen them. I can fathom a few, but I've never seen an exception to that one yet. I don't know, Crystal, if you have.
No, it's typically true, and especially seeing how child support essentially just levels the playing field. It's like, well, then you are at 50-50. So it's like you said, well, where's my grocery bill for my teenage son, right? Is likely the one where they're going to be living out the most. Like financial support, it's a very vague statement. And so that's where I call it #fun conversations for Crystal with all of the divorce. I mean, I have seen more instances of like crazy financial situations than the last 2 months than I have in a really long time. And it's fun to then work through, well, then this is who and why in terms of that conversation. Cause sometimes they, like you said, they just need to get out of their head.
Great. Last question in the chat. Someone missed filing the form for this academic year, the FAFSA form for this academic year, but it's going to file for 25. The question is, can they go back and file for 24? Yeah, the horse is out of the barn. There are deadlines, and the deadline for this academic year is passed. Is that right, Robert?
I mean, you can file if you need to get like a federal student loan for the spring semester. Like that's really the only reason you'd file. But in terms of getting any type of like aid from the university and stuff, that ship has sailed. But like if you do need a student loan for next semester, it doesn't hurt to file now. Just make sure you choose the right year. And then the financial aid office will process that. You probably want to check in with them because it's going to be one of those curveballs that they get, but they'll know what to do. And then you can get that federal student aid for the spring.
Yeah, that's tremendous. We had a long list of questions and a great dialogue. We're coming right up on an hour's worth of time. For both Robert and Crystal, is there anything that you thought we should talk about tonight that we didn't get to, or you want to highlight as we're concluding?
I just want to reemphasize, and I know Crystal talked about this and John, you talked about it, but your SAI is not your expected family contribution. It's not what you're expected to pay for college, but a lot of schools do use it in that way. However, a lot of schools also have their own financial aid policies. So like you don't necessarily know what anything means until you get that actual financial aid award letter. And yes, you can run calculators and hypothesize and plan all day long. But right now, just file the FAFSA, get that number, keep it in your mind, and then just plan on getting the actual letter from the university in the next few weeks or months.
Crystal, anything to add?
No, I think that was a good kind of way to wrap it up. And that's like, right at this point in time, if you're a senior and you're on this call, right, it's you've done what you've done, right? You've got your school list, you need to submit your forms, you're going to wait and see what happens, and then you're going to analyze the data, right? Like that's really what is next. And for those that are younger, it's just recognizing we're talking about a lot of pre-work that you can be doing in order to make this a lot easier on your family, to make it maybe less of an emotional decision because you have more facts and you are a smart consumer.
Yeah, that's Crystal. If folks want to find you, where can they find you?
So you can find me at collegefinancingcoach.com. That is my website. My email is crystal@crystalclearcollegeplanning.com.
Great, thank you, Robert.
Yeah, you can find me at thecollegeinvestor.com. You can read our articles there. And we also spend a lot of time on TikTok and Instagram at The College Investor.
That's great. Thank you both so much. This is really spectacular. I appreciate your time and your effort and your enthusiasm to do this later on a Monday night. There are free, easy tools around. We talked about at mycollegecorner.com as an SAI calculator. So does crystalclearcollegeplanning.com, thecollegeinvestor.com. It's worth doing a little research. Check it out. And for those of you who joined late, please connect with us at mycollegecorner.com on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. We won't spam you. We won't sell your email address. We really just want to give you like great, clear, crystal clear advice on how to plan and pay for college. So Robert, Crystal, thanks again. And thank you all for joining. Thanks for your great questions. And you'll be able to find a recording of this at My College Corner and elsewhere in the coming days. So thank you all. Good night and good luck.